wanted 2 seconds.
Thank you very much for having the opportunity to speak to you. I'd just like to say to you, how many people know about the United Nations Security Resolution 1325? Put your hands up, and I guarantee half of you don't know. It was passed by the United Nations in 2000, October 2000, and it was passed unanimously. I am now the President of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in New South Wales, and it was WILPF who were one of the most important people negotiating for that particular decision to be made. Now, although it was passed in 2000, very little has been done about it. There's a lot been written about it. There's not been very much done about it. A lot of big words, you can't say what's happened here and there. But what is happening now is that we are trying to make sure that everybody becomes aware of what this resolution is about. It's about women in the situations of peace and conflict. Women should have a greater say in the decisions that are made. Women are very often the worst victims of war. War is no longer fought between two battlefields of men. It's become a civilian thing, and women and children suffer the most. So what we're concerned about is not only women in war, but women in peacetime and women in ordinary activities, women working with women with equality and so on. We all know in Australia, we've had a few examples tonight, about the troubles that women have had achieving equality in Australia. But now the reason I want to raise this tonight is that just tonight I've heard confirmation. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in some ways is a sister to WILPF, and last year they were given a grant of $100,000 to investigate and to research what has been happening with I'm sorry, I'm going back to my planning days. I nearly said, are you 486? 1325, numbers in your and one of the things they are going to do is to have a consultation in each state. And I'd like to write this date down. On the 29th of May in New South Wales, we are going to have a meeting at the Women's College. And I only heard this afternoon confirmation of where it's going to be at the time. That's why I haven't got anything to hand out to you. But I will certainly get in touch with all women's organisations. We would like to have a very large consultation. We would like everybody to be able to come and express their opinions. And in fact, I'd like you all even tonight to think, now what would you like to see in something that the government was going to accept as a plan, an action plan for Australia. Now there have been about 10 European countries who've developed an action plan. Australia's not one of them. Australia agreed with it. The Power Government's representative to the United Nations agreed with it, but there it stopped. People talk about it, they write about it. What has happened? Nothing very much. And even in those countries that have adopted a plan, very hard sometimes to see what's happening. A lot of words, not too much action. We hope that we will be able to spread the message amongst Australian women so that they know what 1325 is about, and as many as possible, we'd like to see you at that workshop at the Women's College, 29th of May, 9:30 till 12:30. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Jan Wood. Welcome to today's episode of Coffee Break, and today I'm here at the home of Stefania, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her work with WILPF. Now, she's quite an amazing woman. She's an Order of Australia Medal winner. She's an Edna Ryan awardee, and she spent a very, very busy lifetime working for the, what would you say, in feminist issues. Stefania, you're really passionate about peace issues, aren't you?
Yes, indeed.
And how long have you been like this?
Well, I don't know. I think I grew up a feminist. So I've never ever regarded myself as inferior to men. I used to have a certain level of competition with them at school, and I mostly beat them. And I've always had the feeling that women should be able to do anything anybody else does.
And you've had a long career in family planning.
I've had a long career, full stop. I did learn some family planning when I was at Cransford Hospital, 1944, from another woman doctor who was there. And so when I went out into practice, I was already familiar with the thing that was called family planning. I was surprised, actually, because when I look back, we had absolutely no tuition about, in a positive way, about family planning as a student. We had some lectures on the subject in which they virtually said, we don't believe in this stuff, but you've got to know about it because someone might ask you. And I remember, and I've quoted this many times before, when I asked one of our gynecologists who was our lecturer if she'd tell us a bit more about birth control, and she said, I'm here to teach you how to deliver babies, not how to prevent them, full stop. So ever since then I've had that sort of feeling that I should know something more about it, and I practiced it when I was in my general practice, and when I came back to Sydney and worked in the city itself, I joined the Family Planning Association and became one of their teaching people, really. And then, of course, I took a job in the Department of Health in Canberra as the advisor in family planning and women's health, which started off with the Whitlam government performing what was called at first a consultant. It was going to be 6 months, ended up being 12 years.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of WILPF and how WILPF started?
Yes, well, actually, it's an interesting thing because we have recently celebrated Anzac Day. And I wouldn't say anything against Anzac Day at all, but at the same time as we were preparing for that invasion on Gallipoli, the women's movement were doing something else. On the 28th of April, 1915, they had a meeting which was attended like somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 women who were calling upon the various governments to stop fighting and to find a way to peace. And they also demanded that they should be part of a peace settlement, and that when the war was finally over, that they would themselves be part of the peace discussions. Now, when it came to Versailles, the French would not allow German women into France, and so they had to have their meeting in Holland, and they became the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. There was an Australian woman at that conference, and she came back and she brought the ideas to Australia. But Australia didn't really get very much involved in WILPF, you might say, until the time of the Vietnam War. And although actions did go on in Europe all that time, but during the Vietnam War, when the AICD was formed, later became People for Nuclear Disarmament, that's when Margaret Holmes, who had travelled overseas and seen some of the things that are happening overseas, came back to New South Wales and started a branch of WILPF. So this year, WILPF internationally, is celebrating its 94th birthday, and WILPF New South Wales is celebrating its 50th birthday. And of course that coincides to a degree with the 100th birthday of Margaret Holmes herself.
Over the years, I've been very active in collecting women's stories. Real movers and shakers, people who don't sit around all day doing nothing. They see something that needs doing and they think to themselves, well, if I don't do it, it won't get done. So off they go and do it. And one of my favourite victims with my video camera was Margaret Holmes. She's a very, very well-loved woman. So let's now cut to some footage of Margaret that I recorded in 2002.
My father was a doctor, as I said, and he had been in the some kind of volunteer military thing as a doctor. I don't know what it was, I've forgotten what it was called, but they had some volunteer sort of thing. So when the war came, he was one of the people who was who offered to go overseas with soldiers, with a hospital, whatever hospital it was, forgotten now. Well, they were supposed to be going to England, or to France rather, because the Western Front was on. This was in the beginning of 1915, and Australian soldiers were being sent to France, and this unit was to go and be the hospital for any wounded. So right, Dad sets off in December 1914 or early January. And my mother and 3 children, aged nearly 6. The next sister, aged 3, and the little son, aged 10 months or something. She decided she should go to England too, and take us and set up a house in England, in London, to which my father could come on leave from France and have a nice little family life. So, Mum and us 3 children, plus our nurse girl, a young country Australian girl, Amy, plus my mother's sister, Beatrice, our auntie Trix. We all set off by ship, just after Dad had left on the troop ship, on the hospital ship. We set off for England, via the Cape. Now Dad's ship was to go via the Suez Canal, right? And when Mum got to Cape Town, she had a cable from Dad in Egypt, at the other end of Africa, saying that their unit was to be stopped in Egypt, that it wasn't to go on to England at all. Because Gallipoli was about to happen, you see, in April 1915, and his hospital was to set up there in Cairo, or just out of Cairo, and set up to receive the expected wounded and ill from Gallipoli. So what was poor Mum to do? There she was at the other end of Africa. There was nothing for her to do but to go on to England. So we all went on to England, and I can remember even in the Channel there, we had to spend all night in our clothes because of the submarine in the Channel, in the English Channel. I can remember going to bed and having my little button-up boots on, because you had to be fully clothed. And various men on the ship had told Mum that they would be responsible, each one for one of the children, you see, so she could be sure we'd all be safe, etc. We had lifeboat drill every day and all that kind of thing. Well, I just have vague memories of that. But then Mum got this flat in London, and she then decided that she would go over to Egypt and join Dad in Egypt. Mind you, there's a world war happening in France, in the north of France. Her idea was to catch a train somewhere at Bordeaux or somewhere and take us all the way across France and down through Italy and catch a boat and go over to Egypt. But she was dissuaded from that because people told her that the Germans were coming in so fast that possibly she'd be on a troop train and we'd all be heaved out and the troops would go in and so on. So she decided we'd go by boat. And we had quite a lot of social life, really. And my mother would be invited out to all sorts of things and take the children with her. And that photo shows in some park or garden or other with a Colonel Martin, whom I must say I can't really remember, but he and I have changed hats, you see. He's wearing my hat and I'm wearing his solar topee, which was what the men used to wear. You see, here's another one, Captain Fletcher. He's got a solar topee, and that was what their regulation headgear was. And my mother, of course, has this dark veil which she would put down in the bright sun because she had very pale blue eyes. She was a very fair woman, and she felt the glare terribly. So anywhere you see her, you'll always see her with a veil that she would put down, not from any Islamic principle, but just to shield her from the sun. Well, that's my father. That's my father on a camel, of course, obviously. And this is his uncle, Dr. George Reed. He was in the same hospital unit as my father. He had a practice down at Picton, actually, that he left in order to join up with the forces. And it was one of the things you could do there was to go and get on one of these little trolleys and be taken all the way along on the barrage. It was a kind of like an outing. As far as I remember, the barrage was this kind of dam across the Nile down towards Alexandria, below Cairo. It was a barrage that was meant to control the floods so that Alexandria wouldn't be flooded, and they could hold back the Nile when the flood came and then let the water go through more regulated. I think that was the idea. You can see it's quite an extensive building.
Now, Stefania was very active in organising a birthday party last Saturday. It was a birthday party celebrating WILPF's 94th birthday. It was a party celebrating Margaret Holmes' 100th birthday. Now, Margaret Holmes was instrumental in founding the WILPF New South Wales group in 1959. So it was also a celebration to mark the 50th anniversary of WILPF New South Wales.
Well, this is Michelle Cavanagh.
Thank you. And despite telling me beforehand that she didn't want a letter from the Queen, she was quite thrilled once it arrived. And typical of Margaret, she wrote to the Queen to thank her.
The Queen probably framed that.
Yes. I have to admit that WILPF was an organisation I knew absolutely nothing about until I met Margaret Holmes in the year 2000. At the time I was studying at Macquarie University, and I decided to answer the essay question, why did Australia join the Vietnam War and what were the consequences? And because my husband's a Vietnam veteran, I was particularly interested in delving into the subject further. So Margaret was one of the people I interviewed in my research. A friend of mine who lived in Neutral Bay knew of Margaret, and she actually told me that Margaret was involved with Save Our Sons. And armed with that knowledge, I wrote to her asking if she'd give me an interview. And she was obviously very keen to do so and to correct my assumptions that Save Our Sons was the only thing that she was involved with, and tell me all about WILPF, because she rang me at least 3 times and left messages before we finally managed to get together. Anyway, after meeting Margaret, it didn't take me long to realise what a wonderful champion of peace she was, and that if someone didn't document her story, then it would be lost to history. As most of you here will know, Margaret, well, as Stefania said as well, Margaret founded the New South Wales branch of WILPF, and she was never shy of lending her weight to any good social cause. Spirited and strong-willed, she was shaped by some of the 20th century's most defining moments in war and peace. Born into a wealthy professional family in Wurrunga, together with her 2 siblings, Margaret was taken by her mother to Egypt during the Great War so that they could be near her father, who was a doctor in the Australian Army Medical Corps. And here she met some of the wounded soldiers from Gallipoli who were being looked after in her father's wards, and from whom she amassed a huge collection of cigarette cards, which, if she had them to this day, would probably be worth an absolute fortune. Until she discovered pacifism at Sydney University, Margaret was an ultra-patriotic mirror of her parents' pro-empire views. What her studies taught her about the wider world was a factor in Margaret's transformation, as was membership of the student Christian movement and her work with the university settlement the benevolent society based on the concept of reciprocal learning with premises in the inner city suburbs of Chippendale. Margaret's volunteer work with the settlement brought her into close contact with many of the poor families who lived in the suburbs surrounding the university, experiences which led her to become an anti-capitalist. Of course, as you're all aware, the people who lived in the suburbs surrounding the university had a completely different lifestyle to the ones the inhabitants of Wahroonga. And it was also the calibre of the leaders of the student Christian movement, prominent thinkers, academics and churchmen of the time, together with her strong Christian principles which further fuelled Margaret's pacifist ideals. And it was also through student Christian movement that she met Thomas Arthur Glennie Holmes, known as Tag, her future husband. Following her 6 years of study, Margaret and Tag married, and Tag Holmes became a much-loved doctor in Mosman, and he was also a founding member of the Medical Association for the Prevention of War. Over time, Margaret produced 6 children and was already being shadowed by the New South Wales Special Branch St ASIO in 1960, when she formed the New South Wales branch of WILPF, after she had ventured on a 6-month worldwide journey of peace. It was a journey that took her to India at the invitation of Dr. Shashula Nair, who was Gandhi's physician and who was imprisoned with him, and also it took her to Russia, where she smuggled some Bibles in the height of the Cold War. That was at the invitation of some of the WILPF women she met, Russian WILPF women. Well, I don't think actually at that time WILPF was Russia was officially in WILPF, but they were there. An astute debater and ideas woman, Margaret took up many causes. On the street, she was relentless in organising protests and took part in the most infamous of them all, which a lot of people have probably forgotten because they're too young, when the New South Wales Premier Robert Askin, while in the car with the US President Lyndon Baines Johnson, told the driver to run over the bastards. There's a few different versions of what he actually said.
Run the bastards over, we were there, we were standing in Hyde Park.
Oh, okay, well I thought it was right over the bastards. But anyway,
Run the bastards over.
okay.
We were there.
We were there. You should know then. While she
I was
worked,
that far away from their car. I didn't hear them, but I was that far away.
Okay, right. While she worked on numerous campaigns, the Vietnam War was certainly her busiest. She never flagged, and as she said to me once, if we give up hope, we give up everything. Margaret was instrumental in organising the first International WILPF Congress to be held in the Southern Hemisphere. Lots of issues she's been involved with, war toys, East Timor, a nuclear power station at Jarvis Bay, environmental conservation. Over the years, through WILPF, Margaret worked on targeted peace and justice campaigns, including Aboriginal reconciliation, apartheid in South Africa, demonstrations against weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological and atomic, and she lobbied for the closure of American bases in Australia with somebody who was here. And she tackled issues head-on and was never afraid to confront anyone, no matter who they were, if she felt the need. She was made a member of the Order of Australia in 2000, only agreeing to nomination in the hope of gaining WILPF further publicity. And I think you could say that she has certainly paid her debts to society and lived a life well worth celebrating.
And I think that was a very good speech. Thank you very much. The first song is to the tune of Botany Bay, which you all probably know. Okay, is all my good ready to join?
Yep, we're all ready.
Oh,
we're women, we're stirrers and feminists. We're teachers and writers as well. We're battlers and bankers and optimists. And we're working for rights for us all. Singing Uralai, Uralai, no sending our country to war. We want justice and peace and equality for everyone, wealthy or poor.